Part 7, Goals Coaching and Achieving the Impossible. When it comes to achieving your goals, the most simple rule of thumb, even before you go through any of the goal setting processes, is to remember that you do get what you focus on. We've already seen how the brain deletes irrelevant information and filters in information that you're focused on. So you tend to be drawn towards things that you're thinking and feeling strongly about because that's what your subconscious mind thinks is important to you. So if you're constantly focused on what you don't want, for example, debt or losing business, for example, and all the worst case scenarios, then you tend to notice more and more of the evidence for those scenarios and actually be drawn towards them. In fact, the only reason to focus on what you don't want is to help work out what you want to change or what's causing it. So as soon as you can, focus on what you want and where you're actually going. The next thing to do is ensure that you have visualized the movie scene of what it is that you actually want. The movie scene of your life, that scene in your life where you know you've achieved it and whatever the outcome brings you as a result. So you want to see the movie of your life, the scene where you actually are living with the results of what you've done. Now, traditionally, people have always suggested that you use SMART goals and always write them down. Make them specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Well, the problem with SMART goals, there's nothing wrong with them per se, but they're just not very effective. They're really good for targets and things that somebody else wants you to do so that you can measure them and prove that you've tried to achieve things, or they're great for other people to set you. For your own goals, for your own outcomes, you want to use something that works a little bit better with the subconscious mind. Now, first of all, think about goals as opposed to outcomes. Goals are kind of the milestones that lead up to what we want. And we can get so overly focused on the goals that we don't really think about what those goals are actually going to mean for us in the long term. They're often short-lived, a kind of yes or no. Yes, you might desperately want to get that gold medal, and there's nothing wrong with that goal. But it's worth thinking about what that's going to give you longer term, because sometimes the anticlimax of spending, 15 years, let's say, working towards an outcome or goal, only to realize that it didn't give you what you thought it was going to give you, can be heartbreaking. Even Matt Damon talks about winning an Oscar so young, in his early 20s. And he said on the night of the Oscars, he was staring at this Oscar and he was thinking, oh, thank God I didn't screw anyone over for this. Thank God I didn't spend my whole life working towards this, missing out on things only to realize what a massive disappointment it was. So goals are fine, but we want to think more about outcomes. What are you going to be living with? What's the lifestyle you're going to have? Who are you going to be? What are you going to be doing? What are you going to have as a result longer term? So really the goals are the how, maybe, like the milestones, and the outcome is the why you're doing it, or the what for. So consider, how is your life going to look once you've got your outcome? How will your life change as a result of your outcome? How will you be different? Now, writing these outcomes down is okay, but most people write them down and then never look at them again. The brain and the body need to be engaged, because that's the part of you that's actually going to go out there and look for those opportunities and make it happen for you. So you want to give your brain and body a taste of what it is that you're actually going for, the actual movie scene you want to create in your life. So the most effective way to do that is to visualize your outcome as kind of a technicolor, full picture visualization where you're completely inside of it. and achieving and living with whatever you've achieved, so that you can see it, you can hear it, you can breathe the way that you're going to breathe, walk the way through that scene, looking at how everything in your life has been impacted by this thing that you have created for yourself, so that your whole body understands what it is that you're trying to achieve, what it is that you want. Now, a simple process to do this, if you close your eyes, if it's appropriate to do so, and just picture a outcome that you're working towards. And think about the movie scene in your life where you've got whatever it is that you wanted to have, and you're living with it day to day. Picture that scene in your mind where you're walking through your life, experiencing it, seeing the people in your life that you care about that are also benefiting from this outcome. Feel the feelings, see what you see, hear the noises, the sounds, notice what you're saying to yourself about it. And you can always come back and do this multiple times until you've absolutely created that beautiful outcome for yourself. Unless there is a point in time in the future that you want this, assume that you want it as soon as it is possible. So don't particularly see a time or date, but just think of it as soon as I can have this, that's when I want it. Now, I want you to imagine that somebody that you care about is taking a Polaroid picture of you in this magnificent outcome. And they take the picture and they hand you the photograph, and now you're standing there looking at this picture of yourself, living this wonderful outcome, looking great. And notice the colours are starting to enhance now, the picture's starting to develop, looking beautiful, make it bigger and brighter. Now, at this point, I want you to notice that you're standing in the now, and the future stretches out in one direction and the past in another, in relation to your body. And I want you to imagine you can take that photograph and float up above that line of time and float into the future, over the future, until you start to notice that photograph starting to tug out of your hands because it wants to take its place down on the timeline below. There is a sense of when it's supposed to happen. And when it's tugging really, really strongly, let it go and watch as that picture zooms down into the timeline below you, into your lifetime. And be delighted that it seems to be a lot sooner than you thought. And notice now as that photograph takes its place representing that outcome, as ripples of success flood out into the future. As this outcome creates so many more incredible outcomes for you off into the future. And as you turn around to look towards the now, notice that every resource that you need is being drawn towards you like a magnet, drawn towards your timeline like stepping stones, creating this beautiful, effortless walkway towards what it is that you want. Notice every single resource, every person, every idea, everything's going to be drawn towards you, creating that alignment with what you want. And when you can feel it's there, when it feels inevitable, flow all the way back along the timeline towards the present day, reorientate yourself in the room, come back to now and open your eyes. And that was a goal in timeline process. What you've just done is you have set up an expectation in the subconscious mind, and the more detailed that is and the more accurate in your mind that is a depiction of what it is that you want to create, your subconscious mind has now set that up as an expectation and is now working towards it. You don't have to keep revisiting it, although you're welcome to, and you can change it at any point that you want to. The next thing to think about is alignment. You've asked in your unconscious mind for what it is that you want. You've set that intention, you've set that outcome. So now the only thing stopping you from having what it is that you want are going to be the limiting beliefs that tell you that you can't have it now. And we know that this is true because of the law of confirmation bias. We know this is true because of the self-fulfilling prophecy, that your map of the world is maintained by your perceptual filters. So if you believe that you can't have it, you will keep seeing evidence to that to prove it. So if you have a limiting belief that says you can't have something, it is absolutely futile to keep putting effort and energy into getting it, because you will only ever prove yourself right that you can't have it. Now, most things have been thought to be impossible at one point in history, have always been proven possible in the end by someone who was completely tenacious and tenacious enough and stubborn enough to persevere. But most things people want aren't actually like physically impossible. They're just impossible for them because they have limiting beliefs. So it's most likely that whatever you're dealing with in terms of limiting beliefs are going to be things that make it impossible for you, not impossible in the physical world, which makes it a little bit easier. So let's investigate beliefs a little bit further before we start looking at how to challenge those limiting beliefs. Here's a quick riddle for you. A father and his son are in a car accident. The father's arrested at the scene and put in a cell at the police station. The boy is rushed to hospital and into surgery. The surgeon comes in and says, "I can't operate on that boy. He's my son. How is this possible?" Now, I'll give you a moment to think about it. And if you've not heard it before, all you've got to do is notice what goes on in your brain as you try and answer it. I'll take a moment. I'll give you a moment, but you can pause the recording if you need to give it some more thought. Now, normally, when I ask people to consider this riddle, we get answers such as there are two dads. They question the meaning of father. Do you mean like a priest? And lots of answers along one theme. And the theme that all the answers have in common is the assumption that the surgeon is male. Now, it's common to have unconscious bias towards the gender of particular roles in society. And most of the time, we're oblivious to our unconscious biases. But this is more an example of what happens to our ability to think once we have one of those biases, once we have decided something's true in our minds. We don't know to question something that our subconscious mind thinks is a fact. So you physically can't solve the riddle until you question something that is utterly fact for you, because you've already probably seen the picture of, the surgeon comes in and says, "I can't operate on that boy, he's my son." You've made the picture in your head of a male surgeon, so that can't be questioned. And this is exactly what it's like to have a limiting belief. It literally is limiting in that you cannot think your way out of it. Now, imagine that you're a sales manager and every month you set targets for your team and they start work. What you may not be aware of is that as you handed out those targets, each individual made a decision in their subconscious mind about how possible each of those targets sounded for them. They will then diligently work to prove themselves right. And at some point, you'll meet with them and they'll justify why they're so far off their targets and what they plan to do about it. But to be honest, that's a really inefficient way to work. Now, my recommendation to any sales manager, rather than waiting until you approach a deadline to find out that your team has limiting beliefs, would be to challenge any limiting beliefs when those targets are handed out. The initial reaction is important. By doing this, you can maximize effort, time, and results. Because if in that meeting where you hand out targets, you can challenge those limiting beliefs, you can get people to recognize they don't believe they're possible, but to challenge that and have them leave a meeting feeling that it is possible, they will then spend that entire time looking to prove their new belief right, that they can do it. And people will put the same amount of effort into both. It's really up to you as that sales manager, as that performance manager, which way you want them to prove themselves right with a limiting belief, or prove themselves right with a more empowering belief. So next we're going to look at how to actually challenge all of your limiting beliefs. This is pretty much the only thing that you need to do once you've set an outcome, once you know that's what you want. You need to obviously take positive action. That's part of the 6 principles of success. You have to do something. You can't sit there and just wish it. But obviously all of those actions that you take are pretty futile if they are to prove yourself right that you can't have something. So challenging your limiting beliefs is utterly paramount. So here's a very simple method that you can use to start challenging your limiting beliefs, or someone else's if you're using the process with them. So start by naming the limiting belief. What is it that you actually believe? And we don't want situations. So if someone says, I don't have any money, well, that's a situation. That's kind of, perhaps that's correct. Perhaps they don't have any money. But what's their belief about that? So is their belief that they won't be able to get any money, or that money's hard to come by, or they won't be rich, or what's their actual limiting belief that may be creating that situation or preventing them from getting out of that situation? So for example, I'm not good enough to do what I want to do. You then look at the opposing belief and just take the absolute opposite, the not true of that belief. So I am good enough to do what I want to do. Then what you want to do then is think about the evidence that you're using to back up your limiting belief. What are you basing that on? And somebody might say, well, I didn't meet my targets. I find it a struggle. That's enough evidence. You don't need to get too much evidence because we know you believe it. The most important aspect is to get evidence for the opposing belief, the empowering belief. Because the empowering belief doesn't need to be true. We just need to find enough evidence to prove that our limiting belief isn't 100% true. And remember, we spend most of our time looking for evidence that proves our limiting belief. So this might be the first time we've ever actually tried to look for evidence that proves it false. And trust me, it will always be there. The evidence will always be there. And the reason I know that is because whatever situation they are looking at, that they are using for evidence for their limiting belief, can be looked at in a million different ways that would give them evidence to the contrary. Because every situation can be looked at, as you have already seen, from multiple perspectives. So not every piece of information they've been using to prove their belief, their limiting belief true, is physically correct and only can be looked at one way. There's bound to be so much evidence there that they're missing. The more you try and look for it, the more you'll find it. So often people will surprise themselves and say things like, well, I have actually met targets in tougher times than this. And maybe they'll start thinking, yeah, what was different about that? Why could I do it then and not now? And now they're starting to think more logically. Now they're starting to problem solve. Now they're saying, hey, hang on a minute. Maybe it's the environment that I need to shift a little bit, or my thinking, or what's happened? I used to be able to do this. Oh my goodness, what's changed? Oh, I know what it is. And that's when they start coming up with ideas. They also might say, well, actually, you know what? People do tell me I'm really good at what I do. So maybe I'm just making it hard for myself. But they'll start to recognize that there is evidence for that opposing belief. And all we need is like a crack in the door. All we need is for them to loosen their grip on that limiting belief just enough that they can let some of that evidence in. And as soon as they start to let evidence in that limiting belief might actually not be 100% true, the floodgates start to open and they start to notice more and more evidence that proves that their empowering belief might actually be true. Now, we don't need the empowering belief to be true. All we need is for the limiting belief to be false, because then you can redefine to something more accurate. Because maybe it's not about whether you're good enough to do what you want. Maybe good enough has nothing to do with it, right? Maybe there are aspects about getting what you want that have nothing to do with good enough, and everything about what it is that you're actually doing or what you're actually thinking. So by allowing yourself to say, hang on a minute, I've got evidence to say I am good enough, but I've also got evidence to say I'm not good enough. So hang on a minute, maybe being good enough has nothing to do with it. What's more accurate? At that point, you'll be able to redefine your original belief to something actually more helpful, such as, okay, so when I'm in a team that I feel really supported in, I do brilliantly. Or when I'm selling a product that I really believe in, I do brilliantly. And then you have a solution. Then you have a problem you can solve.